Hi everyone. So I'm looking at the effectiveness of a small marine protected area in Nuarro, which is situated in northern Mozambique. So my project focused around coral reef ecosystems. They are vital ecosystems for marine life and coastal populations. They provide income, resources, and fertile fishing grounds to an estimated 275 million coastal inhabitants through tourism, building materials, as well as the aforementioned fertile fishing grounds. Coral reefs are ecologically and economically important, however they are incredibly delicate ecosystems. Threats to the ecosystem include climate change through increased oceanic temperatures as well as ocean acidification, overexploitation through fishing, as well as pollution, anthropogenic pollution. One method of protecting them is through the use of marine protected areas, or MPAs. Sorry. MPAs aim to prevent some anthropogenic damage through the preventing extraction of natural resources and to decrease other harmful anthropogenic impacts, allowing the habitat and population to recover. MPAs also increase the biomass via egg and larval exportation out of the MPA, as well as the spillover effect. In order for an MPA to be effective, it needs to try and attain 5 key factors. These are that it should be a no-take MPA, so no extraction can occur within the boundaries. The boundaries and rules of the MPA should be well enforced. The MPA should be well established. Generally, older MPAs provide better results or better protection to the habitat. The MPA should also be as large and as isolated as possible. However, this is not always possible due to the circumstances they may be set up in. So my study took me to Nuarro, which is situated in Nampula province, northern Mozambique. It's approximately 2,500 kilometers north of Maputo, situated on the Bajo do Pindo Peninsula. It is just south of Pemba. I don't know if anyone's been there, but the history of the Nuarro MPA. The Nuarro MPA shares the bay with Nanata village. The village is incredibly poor and is dependent on the fish yields from coral reefs for a large majority of their protein. In 2008, an MPA was created by Nuarro Lodge in association with the village. It's roughly represented in the red outline. It's not an official boundary, but it's just an estimation. The bay is approximately 1.7 kilometers wide, so the MPA is only about 850 meters wide. The MPA was implemented because the lodge noticed that some of the coral reefs were being destroyed due to the use of the fishing practices of the village, and so they implemented it to reduce the fishing pressure and protect the biodiversity. Important to note was that no previous work has been done on this MPA, so I was the first person to do any research on it. Part of the agreement with the village was that Nuarro Lodge would compensate the village for the land that they bought, and by involving the local builders, or involving locals in the building of the lodge, as well as maintenance and upkeep. They also agreed to improve the infrastructure of the village by building clinics and schools. You can see a school here. A new classroom was just built, and it was finished while I was there, so it was quite exciting for the local village. The aims of my study were to quantify whether the MPA actually had an effect on fish diversity and abundance, as well as to evaluate if there was any change in percentage benthic cover within the MPA and outside the MPA, and finally to evaluate if there were any changes in fish abundance or percentage benthic cover with depth. To evaluate this, I conducted 8 transects. 4 were conducted inside the MPA and 4 were conducted outside the MPA. 2 transects were transects 3 and 4 were conducted in the heavily fished area right in front of the village, and transects 5 and 6 were conducted around the point. This area is also available to be fished in. However, due to the extra effort required to get there, it was thought that there may be less fishing pressure on the region. 4 of my transects were conducted at a depth of 15 meters, and 4 of my transects were conducted at a depth of 6 meters. This was to evaluate if there was any change with depth. It involved me myself and another diver laying a transect of 30 meters and then taking photos of the benthic cover every meter. once I'd finished all 30 meters, I waited for a period of about 2 to 5 minutes to allow any disturbance on the fish life I may have caused to dissipate. I then swam the reverse, counting the fish in a 2.5 meters on either side and 5 meter above sort of half cylinder as I swam along the 30 meters and tried to quantify all of the fish. The results showed that, quite surprisingly, that depth was more influential than location, as well as outside had a higher diversity index than inside, which was quite surprising, considering I was hoping the MPA would be more effective, but it didn't show that. For the fish results, it also showed that depth was more important than location, and as well that outside had a higher diversity indices than inside, but surprisingly the MPA did have a higher abundance of species. The key findings from our study were that even though depth was more important than location, the two transects in the heavily fished area, transects 3 and 4, were clustered together, and this was attributed to the anthropogenic damage you can see here. That is the effect of dropping an anchor stone on the coral reef. It exposes the coral skeleton, which leaves the coral open to parasitism, as well as it just generally leads to death of the coral. No significant differences were found for the coral assemblage with location or depth. The key findings from our fish study was that depth was significantly more important than location for fish. This was attributed to their fishing methods because of their poverty, they are reduced to using hand lines, as well as the mosquito nets they get given for anti-malaria. They end up using these to fish, so it's not good for either the malaria or the reef. So I also found that transects 5 and 6, so around the point, had a higher biodiversity than transects 3 and 4, which indicated that the increased effort required to get there was decreasing the fishing pressure. No large fish were found within the region. There was really no large marine life at all, which indicates that the health of the ecosystem may not be as good as expected. The majority of my results were non-significant, and this may be due to the MPA not meeting some of the main principles for effective MPAs. Poaching is quite prevalent within the MPA, so the buy-in from the community is not as effective as hoped. Even a small amount of poaching may affect the results quite drastically due to species-specific poaching or targeting of the larger species, so that will heavily influence my results. It is incredibly tough to enforce the boundaries of the MPA because on the landward side there's thick brush which the poachers manage to get through, but it's hard to police. As well as on the seaward side, in order for the fishermen to get to transects 5 and 6, they need to go through the MPA, and when they go through the MPA while they're paddling, they occasionally drop hand lines in and effectively trawl while they go through, so that's difficult to to manage. The MPA has only been up for 9 years, so it's not as well established as it could have been, and I think with more time the results will show better effects. Also, the MPA is incredibly small and it's not isolated. However, these were the conditions that allow for it to exist, so these two are not able to be changed really. For the future, I think that the MPA, even though it hasn't been effective, it should continue in its current form, and hopefully with more time the results will be more significant. Social aspects of the effect of the MPA need to be considered because, as I said earlier, there's not much buy-in from the local villages, and if we could find out why they don't particularly enjoy the MPA, then, well, not enjoy, but they don't agree with it, then we may be able to find out why or how to fix it. And like I said earlier, it's useful as a baseline study because no previous work has been conducted on it, so it provides baseline data that can be used in the future. Thanks.